for example, the establishment of an independent election committee. One other thing which is really very important, the structuring or the restructuring of the expatriate population, and the implementation of the process of Kuwaitization, meaning the replacement of Kuwaitis, in the most important of vital jobs.
The history of democracy in Kuwait cannot only be attributed to the day in which the Constitutional Council was established or when the first National Assembly was elected, because the genuine democratic spirit in the people has from the very beginning reflected itself in the type of relationship between the ruler and the citizens. In fact, the relationship between the leadership and the people was of the type that prevails in one family and was always governed by Arab values and bonds. In this sense, we can freely assert that the democratic exercise began in Kuwait as early as the year 1752, when the people agreed to install the Al Sabah family as their rulers in what was then known as consensus and consultation because of their wisdom and love for the common good and justice. Al Sabah rule came in a democratic way, much like today's election, in which most Kuwaiti people take the crucial decision of who will rule the country. To this way, the Kuwaitis get what they wanted without being forced to accept a government imposed on them, and this was the first structure to build upon the foundations of democracy in the Kuwaiti community. Democracy continued its march and flourished in Kuwait, reflecting belief of the ruler and the subjects in the right of everyone to take part in the process of decision-making. The people and members of the Al Sabah family joined hands and rallied their lines in collective efforts and deep love to build a prosperous future for the coming generations and to leave a glorious past in which they take pride that many factors played a decisive part in consolidating democracy in the early beginning of Kuwait's history.
One other important issue is the overcoming of the previous, if you like, confrontation between the legislative and executive branch of government. In other words, I think it's very important at this, let's say, current day or in today's world to realize that, for example, in Kuwait, we live in a very volatile region. The Middle East itself has been witnessing a lot of, if you like, political and social revolutions and changes and even crises, if you like. So understanding our, let's say, regional context should encourage our brothers and sisters, hopefully in the new assembly, to reduce, if you like, or at least manage the confrontational, let's say, relationship with the government, because both parties, the government and the assembly, represent, let's say, the most qualified Kuwaitis who, basically want to serve their own people. So in addition to, let's say, improving the political dialogue between the two branches of government, we need also to, I think, focus on overcoming the deadlock in the relationship. In other words, we need to avoid, if you like, the personalization of political attacks upon, say, individuals either in the government or, if you like, in the assembly itself.
The National Assembly is the legislative authority of the state of Kuwait that has a mandate of legislation and oversight on the executive authority's work and implementation of laws. Kuwait National Assembly consists of 50 members elected by the Kuwaiti people, and the constitution requires that the number of ministers not exceed 1/3 of the number of deputies, meaning that it does not exceed 16 ministers. The executive authority can choose a member of parliament for the position of the ministry. In this case, he's a minister in the executive authority and a deputy in the legislative authority. The National Assembly has succeeded to be the democratic tool that gave a chance to all people to express their views and participate in decision-making. It has been successful as a real legislative institution that has produced for the Kuwaiti society the political institutions and mechanisms which participated in the progress of the development of the state of Kuwait. The most salient feature of the democratic practice in Kuwait is the continuous spirit of close integrity, even during the gravest circumstances of tension and crises.
Economically speaking, for example, we are facing some kind of an inflation. The prices of basic needs in Kuwait are increasing. We have the problem of debts, citizens' debt, and we have to manage to find a way where we can help our fellow citizens to overcome this very challenging, if you like, financial and economic situation. One other thing we also need to, I think that the Assembly itself need to realize, or at least the members, the active members of the Assembly need to realize, is that their role as members of Parliament, at least their role now as candidates, and also later as members of Parliament, is to improve, if you like, the local economy, is to help the executive branch of government to implement the development plans and also to achieve our, if you like, larger goals, like, for example, the 2030 vision of New Kuwait. And this is basically the umbrella under which all kinds of development in either in our administration or in our economy or in our security should, you know, if you like, continue to be implemented and activated. However, if any number of, let's say, members of Parliament chooses to reuse or to bring back again the confrontational tones that we witnessed in the previous assemblies, I think this will lead us to an ultimate, if you like, an inevitable deadlock with the government itself.
In August 1961, the late Emir Sheikh Abdullah Salim al-Sabah issued a decree forming a higher council tasked with working on law-organizing constituent assembly elections. The law divided the country into 10 electoral areas, from which 2 representatives would be elected via secret ballot. Members of the assembly would amount to 20 elected representatives as well as appointed ministers. The law also specified that an elected representative must not be younger than 30 years of age and that he masters the Arabic language in reading and writing. In the morning of January the 20th, 1962, Sheikh Abdullah Salim inaugurated the assembly in a speech declaring principles of democracy and describing it as a pillar of the modern state, and affirmed it's the duty of the assembly to propose modes of governance qualified for a democratic future. During the session, Abdul Latif Thaniyan al-Ghanim was chosen as Assembly Speaker and Dr. Ahmed al-Khatib as Deputy. The Assembly formed a committee of 5 personnel to draft the Constitution, including all Yaqub al-Hamidi, Hamoud al-Khalid, Abdul Latif al-Ghanim, Saoud al-Abd al-Razak, as well as the late Sheikh Saad al-Abdallah Sabah. The committee accomplished its task in 23 meetings between March of 1962 and October of the same year, and handed in its report to the Assembly, which discussed and voted on it. On January the 23rd of the following year, and after concluding the works of the Constituent Assembly, the first National Assembly elections were held in accordance with the newly instated Constitution, which remains to be governed doctrine to this day.
Maybe the major issue here in regards to the role of the assembly itself is to reassure Kuwaitis who have almost more than half a century of a democratic experience that our democracy is developing continually. In other words, we need to overcome, let's say, the negative aspects of our previous performance, meaning all of us, candidates, citizens, electors, government members, and so on. So, in other words, we need to realize that when we start our, the upcoming, if you like, electoral event, if you like, or elections, we are not really coming from, an empty space. We are coming from an almost 50 years of democratic experience. So, hopefully, if the assembly members, meaning both actually branches of government, the legislative and the executive branch of government, if they succeed in realizing that we live in a historical context that is very sensitive, we live in a region that is full of sensitive issues. If both branches of government realize that we have no time to waste, and I think if we reach that very positive stage of legislative and executive understanding of the major issues and goals of our country, I think we will overcome whatever was negative and unpromising in our previous experience.
The Shura, or Consultative Council, was followed by a number of elected assemblies, the first of which was the Municipal Council in 1931, then the Educational Council in 1936. Because of this exercise, the idea of establishing a sort of parliamentary system matured so as to broaden participation in the decision-making in the country, compatible with the tempo of progress and development which Kuwait witnessed at the time. The year 1938 witnessed significant democratic development when voters elected the Consultative Shura Council, when drafted the country's statute for the emirate, and which later became Kuwait's constitution with the dawn of independence in 1961, which was a new phase of the democratic practice began in Kuwait when Law No. 1 was issued, which provided for the establishment of a constitutional council in direct and free elections. Kuwait's constitution laid down foundation for the people's participation in governance and the supervision of the executive authority performance, and it also guaranteed political liberties and clearly defined roles and missions in the manner that safeguards balance between the legislative, executive, and judicial authorities. The democratic process then began its march in Kuwait when its birth was officially declared by the election of the National Assembly in 1963, because of the first parliamentary elections in the history of modern Kuwait. The National Assembly carried out its mission in success and became the democratic tool which enabled the population to express themselves freely and make part in the decision-making process. It also succeeded as a constitutional institution, providing the Kuwaiti society with the political establishment and mechanisms which enhanced Kuwait's development and progress.
Historically, the Kuwaiti democratic experience is very distinguished. In other words, I think we are the only country in, let's say, in our Gulf region that we have this very special historical democratic experience, meaning we have been dealing with the democratic issues since the early 20th century, meaning since the almost 1930s and 40s. So this experience, this very rich historical experience, is very unique, not just in our let's say Gulf region, but also in the larger Middle East region. And as Kuwaitis, both as politicians, as ordinary citizens, we need to remember or at least remind ourselves that the democratic tools we have today are very precious. They can be very practical in achieving our development plans. They can be very practical tools to improve our economy. They can be very practical tools to establish tolerance in our culture, to spread, acceptance, mutual acceptance between members of the society. So it is actually the democratic experience, at least in today's world, at least in our, let's say, local context, represents an effective tool to improve all aspects of life in Kuwait.
The Constitution is the basic law of the country that specifies the basis of the society and state, organizing its authorities, their formation and activities, and the rights and duties of citizens. The Constitution is considered an important development in the relationship between the state and the citizen, as it makes the country subject to law as the basic law of the nation. The Constitution of the State of Kuwait, that was enacted in 1962, is a strict written constitution. It determines special conditions and procedures for its amendment and revision stricter and more complicated than those conditions stimulated in relation to ordinary laws. Concerning its establishment and the way in which it was formed, it was a contractual constitution between the ruler and the people. Therefore, the year 1962 is the year in which the state of Kuwait started its first constitutional steps towards the democratic way and adopted this principle in its political rule that was at the same time as the reign of His Highness the late Emir Abdullah Salim al-Subah. The first elected representative council had concentrated on reform and organization of the country, whether in the economic, security, or administrative fields, and establishment of the basis of a modern country. The Constitution is an expression of the will of the ruler and the citizens to live within the framework of an active constitutional democracy and build the state of law. It's also a document determining the system of the state, regulates the relationship between the executive, legislative, and judicial authorities. Prior to the issuance of the Constitution, Kuwaitis elected the Constituent Assembly in January 1962 to draft the first constitution of the nation. The Assembly formed a 5-member committee to oversee the wording of the draft that defines the entity of the State of Kuwait, regulates relations among authorities, and freedoms. There are certain articles in the Constitution that make people proud to be citizens, as these articles would guarantee their rights in different fields. For example, according to Article 36 of the Constitution, people have the right and freedom of expression, and this article guarantees that right. This article reads that freedom of opinion and of scientific research is guaranteed. Every person has the right to express and propagate his opinion verbally, in writing, or otherwise, in accordance with the conditions and procedures specified by law. In addition, Article 35 of the Constitution also guarantees the freedom of belief for all citizens, as this article reads, freedom of belief is absolute. The state protects the freedom of practicing religion in accordance with the established customs if it does not conflict with public policy or morals. Meanwhile, Article 37 guarantees the freedom of the press even before Arab states had a printing press, and discussed the freedom of expression or freedom of press. The issue was guaranteed in the Constitution of Kuwait. The article reads as follows: freedom of the press, printing and publishing is guaranteed in accordance with the conditions and manner specified by law. There are other articles in the Constitution, including Article 43, which guarantees the freedom of forming societies and unions, and Article 44 guarantees the freedom of congregations too. It is worth mentioning that in November 1962, the Constitution of Kuwait approved and promulgated calls for direct elections to a unicameral parliament. The third chapter of the Constitution of Kuwait, issued in 1962, has described the articles and competencies of the legislative authorities in three main areas. First, the legislative affairs include bills, decrees, and treaties. Second, political affairs, which include decisions, proposals, questions, interpellations, requests for debate, inquiries, and receiving petitions and complaints from citizens. Thirdly, financial affairs, which include the discussions, debates, and ratification of public budgets and their annual final accounts, as well as the approval of the Assembly's budget. Kuwait proudly identifies itself as the region's oldest functioning democracy, and Kuwaitis across the spectrum expressed continuing loyalty to the Constitution, which established an elected National Assembly and separate executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Respect for basic rights of free speech and assembly are ingrained in the Kuwaiti society and are generally respected by the government.
The Kuwaiti women have played a major, vital role in Kuwait, not just before when the women used to engage in trade when their husbands were away, whether it was pearl diving or getting goods from abroad, but if we talk about the present, Kuwaiti women have played a role in diverse occupations. And if we want to talk about right now, we've just had two appointments. One is the Kuwait Fund for the Advancement of Science, where a woman is heading it for the first time, Dr. Amina Rajab. We also have yesterday the appointment of a woman as deputy head of the municipality, which is unusual and not in any Gulf country. Plus, we have women leaders in the oil sector, we have women CEOs in the banking sector, and the food authorities headed by a woman. You have KISR, the Kuwait Investment for Scientific Research. What I'm trying to say is that women have not just been present in the stereotypical jobs, they have played a major role in all fields of economic development. Let's start with when we got the right. When we got the right in 2005, Dr. Ma'sooma Mubarak was the first female minister of planning. At that time, Allah yarhamah, may he rest in peace, our Amir, Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jabir Al-Sabah, was the prime minister. As you know, women have to register in February. She made a wise and very smart decision. She got all women registered through the civil ID. And that really helped that in 2006, most women were able to vote. And we had, at that point, more than 60% of the women had voted. But as you know, we had 4 when we were allowed, which was not just one vote. At that point, we were allowed to vote for more than one, and therefore, we were able to get more women into parliament. Women, when they got into parliament, of course, they made a great impact in policies, whether it was housing, whether it was in different issues, economic issues. Women are independent candidates. It's not easy, especially when we have so many elections going on. And I think the major hurdle was when it became one vote. When it became one vote, it was deciding between a man and a woman. They did not think that, okay, we give one woman and one man. And this was a great hurdle and a challenge for women. Now you see we've had elections going on so often. Not many women can afford to have the, put themselves forth as candidates, because it takes a toll economically on their families, on many issues.
The experience of democratic practice in Kuwait was not without problems or crises. Rather, for it to mature and develop naturally, it needed to go through some influential and important junctures in its history. After Kuwait's liberation on February the 26th of 1991, the government set 5th of October of the same year as the date for the new elections, according to 26 Constitution article. The elected National Assembly represented all segments of the people and returned to the Kuwaiti democracy its shining image.
I think we will get some women in, especially now that, we had two women who played an important role, who had visibility, who had an opinion on issues. Ali Al-Khalid in education, Jinan Boushehri when she spoke about many issues. So I think now there is that view that yes, these women are concerned about issues that are not just women's issues, but issues that concern Kuwait as a whole. So I think we will, and I hope, we will get some women into parliament. It's not easy because it's a short time, but yes.
The democratic experience in Kuwait since the beginning of the 20th century became a special case on both regional and international levels, as it contributed a lot to the good image of Kuwait on international forums. Though the experience was distinguished, some achievements made outstanding milestones in that march, one of which was the fulfillment of the will of the late Emir Sheikh Jaber Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Subah to approve granting women their full political rights in both elections and being elected to parliament membership in the year 2005, shortly before his death.
It's very important to have women in the National Assembly, in any country. And the reason is that any change we want has to go through the parliament. The parliament is the legislative body. We are not Majlis Shura like it is in some of the Gulf countries. And often when we have laws that concern the family, that concern women, and it's put to the vote, it's very often that most of the men will not think of it as a priority. Having women there, they will not only propose these changes, they will also support it, and their presence there with others who are for the progress of both men and women will lead to change. So it's very important to have women, because we want a balanced parliament where there is the views of males and females, where they will bring their point of view. Yes, we need women.
Granting women their full political rights came as a boost to democracy in Kuwait, which hitherto was proceeding single-legged. Kuwaiti women constitute about 30% of the diplomatic corps in the last batches, hold positions in the judiciary, women's police, firefighting, the oil sector, health and educational systems, and other vital places.
The Kuwaiti Vision 2035 is a vision where we are talking about sustainable development in all the 17 areas. Women are there in whether it's finance, whether it's the environment, etc. But to have diversity, to have inclusion of women, we need to support women who have the criteria, who have the capabilities to be in these positions of leadership. Therefore, we need more women in leadership. We hope that by getting into the parliament, we will have more women in leadership. And this will not only show Kuwait's true intention of having at least 35% of women in leadership positions, but also how it has supported SDG 5.
Kuwaiti women have contributed greatly to political decision-making over the years through holding many leadership positions, including ministers, members of the National Assembly, under-secretaries, and directors of the authority. Kuwaiti women, in returning to Parliament chair after the victory of 2 women during the recent elections for the National Assembly, as well as the appointment of 4 highly qualified women in the Municipal Council in a historical precedent. Kuwait has taken many measures and legislation that affirm gender equality and guaranteed women the right to education, the right to work, and material and economic independence on an equal basis with men. Kuwait is working to build a new Kuwait by 2035, and it is fully aware that the ambitious vision cannot be achieved without women's participation.
Women, not only do they need to be confident enough to follow the occupation that they are educated for, that they are capable of, but we also need the law, the labor laws, to allow women to enter different fields. And this is what the Committee of Women and Work in the Supreme Council Planning and Development are working on. And the Supreme Council Planning and Development has also worked on leadership training for women, where we have many women reaching leadership positions. So I think what we need is decision makers, which is the government or the private sector, to encourage women. And we need the women to have the confidence and the intention that no matter what challenge, she can succeed if she wants. It is very important to have this kind of dialogue, and it was on May 16th, which was the day of Kuwaiti women's rights. As you might have seen, most of the audience were young women who do not know how hard we worked to get political rights. They need to know that it was not a decision made overnight. We had worked on it from the late 80s till we got it in 2005. They need to know how women and men, the younger generation then, plus men who were supportive of women, worked to get this right. So this kind of dialogue not just shows our past, but gives role models for young women who are the future.
The elections for the 17th legislative term, scheduled for June the 6th, are the 8th elections within the 5-constituency system, considering the elections that took place in the nullified councils, the 1st February 2012, the 2nd December 2012, and the 3rd September 2022. The 5-constituency system began in Kuwait in the elections of the 12th legislative term, or Majlis 2008, provided that the voter had the right to cast 4 votes, starting from the 2nd annulled council in December 2012 until now. Since the beginning of parliamentary life in Kuwait, the parliamentary elections witnessed 3 systems for dividing electoral districts in different stages, and 5 parliamentary elections were held according to the 10-constituency system, including the Constituent Assembly, compared to 7 elections according to the 25-constituency system. The voting for the voter varied over the course of the parliamentary elections between 5 votes, 4 votes, and 2 votes to 1 vote. The history of dividing Kuwait into electoral districts dates back to 1961 through 20 electoral districts. The law was amended before the Constituent Assembly elections were held, and Kuwait was divided into 10 districts. Elections were held according to this division in 4 legislative chapters, in addition to the Constituent Assembly, where the voter was given the right to vote for 5 candidates. Since 1991, after the return of parliamentary life, Kuwait was divided into 25 constituencies, and the National Assembly elections were held according to this division in 7 legislative chapters until 2006 Parliament, and the voter was given the right to vote for 2 candidates. As of the 28 elections, Kuwait was divided into 5 constituencies, and this division is still in progress, based on which elections were conducted for 7 legislative terms with different voting system for each candidate. In 2008 and 2009 elections, the voter was given the right to vote for 4 candidates, and starting with 2012 elections, the 2nd nullified council, passing through 2013, 2016, 2020, and 2022, 3rd nullified elections, and up to the current elections, voters vote for only 1 candidate. Inquiries about the electoral registration and the polling place are available through the Sahel app. The Ministry of the Interior announced the addition and activation of the service for inquiring about the electoral registration, the polling station and voting on the Sahel app or the application, in addition to the ministry's website. The General Department of Relations and Security Media at the Ministry of Interior stated that the Human Resources and Technical Support sector, in coordination with the General Department of Legal Affairs, the Election Affairs Department, have added this service, which comes as part of efforts of the security establishment to make it easier for citizens.
The general atmosphere in the candidacy for the assembly, at least this is from my own perspective, from someone who continually, if you like, follows the local developments, local issues, and so on. So I think you notice that there is a little bit of improvement from the previous, let's say, quote-unquote atmosphere, political atmosphere in the previous or during the previous assembly. In other words, maybe I think we have reached a stage where people have started to feel fed up, started to feel, pessimistic to some extent because of what happened in the last few years, meaning the confrontation between the two branches of government, the deadlocks that basically stopped all kinds of development in Kuwait, and hopefully one would aspire to the ideas and perspectives of the younger Kuwaitis, meaning younger people, men and women of Kuwait, the new generation, to at least contribute something more positive to the current political debate. We have to overcome this, let's say, outmoded, traditional election, if you like, discourses, especially negative, personalized attacks, discourses, and we need to present to the Kuwaiti citizens something that is more promising, something that is more positive, something that is more effective in changing his daily life into something better. So in other words, each candidate should have a very specific, let's say, set of goals that they want to achieve. In other words, they need to be very transparent in their with their audience, with the Kuwaiti, if you like, electors, about what are they going to do to achieve, these goals, and they also need to rely or at least respect the mentalities of their electors. In other words, the Kuwaiti society is full of very educated people. They are very intelligent. They are democratically aware for almost for the almost last 50 years or so. So they need, these candidates for the assembly need to take these things into consideration when they address, the Kuwaiti electors, and also, hopefully things will change for the better.
It is necessary to explain the mechanism of vote counting. At 8 o'clock in the evening, the chairman of the Electoral Commission announces the end of the round. The working procedures are made through each committee, where they draw up a report signed by the committee chairman and members presented. And immediately after the end of the election, in all the periodic committees, the ballot box will be called by public call. Counting the votes shall be drawn up in an original and a copy, and this shall be done by the present chairman and members of the committee. Then the box is closed and sealed with red wax, except for the original commission boxes. Then each subcommittee transfers the ballot box to the headquarters of the original committee to which it is affiliated, accompanied by the head of the committee, a representative of the Ministry of the Interior, and 5 representatives of the present candidates. The original record of counting the votes and the ballot boxes shall be delivered to the chairman of the original committee, and the heads of the original committee shall receive the original minutes of the counting of the votes of the subcommittees and ballot boxes in case there is no agreement to collect the results of the ballot boxes sorted by the public call. The record of the aggregate sorting of the result of the election place shall be drawn up in an original and a copy and shall be signed by the present chairman and members of the committee. The original shall be accompanied by the minutes of sorting by the subcommittees. The copy shall be placed in the box of the original committee, and the box shall be closed and sealed with wax. The Constitution is the observer of the progress of democracy in Kuwait since the Emirate era up until the present time, in which the Constitution and the sovereignty are ruling. This would realize that Kuwait has experienced and practiced democracy and consultation since it began in the Dawawin or the Diwaniyas. The ruler and his people were always in permanent and continuous meetings almost daily. These small parliaments were substituted at a later stage by the National Assembly, which is the grand house for the people's representatives. Consultation was the approach and technique used to enhance the relationship between the ruler and citizens. Kuwait's democracy is an outstanding experience characterized with its authentic Arabic and Islamic values, where individuals dissolve within the group and everyone is seeking a better life dominated by better life characterized with harmony, peace, and tranquility. Thus, the parliamentary and political life goes on in an atmosphere of democracy where citizens enjoy freedom of expression, selection, and self-determination. The absolute beneficiary is the homeland, Kuwait.